The happiest day of my life turned into the beginning of a battle I never expected to fight. Only a few hours after I signed the papers for the mountain cabin I had spent almost 10 years working toward, my mother called to announce that she and my father had already decided to move into it the very next morning because, according to her, my success belonged to the entire family instead of the person who earned it. My name is Evelyn Brooks, and I was 29 years old when I finally became the owner of a peaceful cabin overlooking a quiet lake in northern Colorado after years of sacrificing vacations, expensive hobbies, and almost every unnecessary luxury that crossed my path. I had left my demanding corporate career only a few weeks earlier after securing a flexible consulting contract, and I believed I was finally beginning a chapter where every decision, every sunrise, and every dream belonged entirely to me without anyone trying to control my future. The dream had started when I was 19 after taking a summer job at a small lakeside diner where I spent long evenings serving travelers who laughed around campfires while I quietly imagined what it would feel like to own a place where nobody could tell me how to live. Every exhausting shift strengthened my determination because walking home beneath the stars reminded me that freedom was never handed to people like me, but earned one disciplined decision at a time through patience, sacrifice, and relentless commitment. Back then I still lived with my parents while attending community college, yet almost every family resource was directed toward my younger brother, Mason, because everyone insisted his ambitions deserved immediate investment while mine could wait until a more convenient time. I attended morning classes, worked late into the night, completed assignments during lunch breaks, and slowly built a future with almost no assistance because every request I made for support was answered with another reminder that responsible adults learned to solve their own problems. Whenever my parents offered financial help, it always arrived with invisible conditions attached that somehow returned months or even years later as emotional debts they expected me to repay with obedience instead of gratitude. After borrowing $12,000 for tuition during one difficult semester, I carefully repaid every cent within 2 years, saving every receipt and bank statement because I had learned from painful experience that memories inside my family changed whenever someone wanted something from me. After earning my degree, I rented a tiny apartment with cracked walls and unreliable plumbing before accepting a position in financial administration where I volunteered for overtime whenever possible and deposited every bonus into a savings account that I secretly named New Beginning. My friends explored new countries, upgraded their cars, and celebrated expensive weekends together while I quietly declined invitation after invitation because every dollar I protected carried me one careful step closer to the peaceful home I had promised myself years earlier. The evening I unlocked the front door of my cabin for the first time, I carried a single box into the living room and stood quietly beside the wide windows while watching the lake shimmer beneath the setting sun because every sacrifice suddenly felt worthwhile after years of chasing what many people called an impossible dream. My peaceful moment lasted less than 10 minutes before my phone rang, and instead of hearing warm congratulations from my mother, Linda Brooks, I heard cheerful excitement as she casually informed me that she and my father, Harold, had sold their home and would be moving into my cabin the following morning since they had already decided it offered far more comfort than renting a smaller place. At first I honestly believed she was making one of her usual jokes because no reasonable parent would assume ownership over a home purchased entirely with someone else's hard-earned money without even asking for permission before making life-changing plans. My confusion disappeared the moment she laughed and confidently explained that the upstairs master bedroom would become their private suite while I could easily use one of the smaller guest rooms because, in her opinion, unmarried daughters should always make room for their parents regardless of who paid for the property. I reminded her as calmly as possible that every payment, every mortgage document, and every legal responsibility belonged to me alone because I had never promised anyone permanent housing or shared ownership of my cabin with another person. Her friendly voice instantly turned cold as she insisted that families did not need invitations to live together before adding that if I disliked the arrangement, I was welcome to find another place to stay because the cabin should naturally belong to everyone who shared the Brooks family name. Before I could answer, I heard my younger brother Mason shouting happily from somewhere behind her, telling me that the moving truck had already been scheduled to arrive before lunchtime and reminding our parents not to forget the expensive furniture they planned to place inside my home. Instead of arguing or pleading like I had done so many times throughout my life, I quietly ended the call, looked around at the unopened boxes scattered across my living room, and felt an unfamiliar sense of calm because for the very first time they're outrageous. That evening I sat alone in my new kitchen with a warm cup of coffee, replaying every word from the conversation, until I realized something important that completely changed the way I viewed the situation, because this was never a misunderstanding or a desperate request for temporary help after an unexpected emergency. My parents had already sold their own home, arranged professional movers, informed relatives about their exciting new living arrangement, and confidently built an entire future around the assumption that I would quietly surrender everything I had spent nearly a decade earning without ever daring to say no. I opened the family group conversation and slowly scrolled through messages from the previous several weeks, discovering that my mother had confidently told relatives that everyone would soon gather at my lakeside cabin because it would become the perfect place for the entire family to begin an exciting new chapter together. Several cousins congratulated my parents on their supposed fresh start. One aunt politely asked whether I was comfortable sharing my home, and my mother casually replied that I always complained at first before eventually accepting whatever decision benefited the family. As I continued reading those messages, I remembered a strange voice recording my brother had accidentally sent me almost 2 weeks earlier before quickly asking me to delete it because he claimed it had been intended for someone else. Curiosity led me to replay the recording, and this time I noticed him thanking our mother for transferring a huge amount of money while confidently saying that once they settled into my cabin they would no longer need to worry about finding another place to live, proving their entire plan had been carefully arranged long before anyone informed me. The truth hit me harder than I expected because I suddenly realized my parents had not been forced into a difficult situation by bad luck or financial hardship, but had knowingly created their own housing problem after giving away a large portion of the money from selling their home to help my brother chase another risky business dream. Instead of asking him to share responsibility or using the remaining money to rent a comfortable place, they simply decided that my cabin would become the solution because they believed my years of sacrifice automatically belonged to everyone else. For several minutes I sat silently staring through the cabin windows while the evening breeze carried gentle waves across the lake, and I finally accepted something I had spent my entire life trying to avoid because my family fully understood how unfair their behavior was and simply expected me to surrender once again. Every conversation from my childhood suddenly made sense as I remembered being told to compromise, remain patient, and keep the peace while my brother received endless second chances without ever facing the consequences of his own decisions. Instead of wasting another night trying to prepare emotional speeches that nobody intended to respect, I carefully organized every important document connected to my cabin, including the purchase agreement, mortgage records, repayment receipts, bank statements, and copies of every family message that proved I had never invited anyone to move into my home. Once everything was safely stored in both printed folders and digital backups, I contacted the real estate attorney who had handled my purchase because I wanted professional guidance before my parents arrived, believing they could simply walk through my front door and claim a life that had never belonged to them. The attorney answered my call even though it was already late in the evening, and after patiently listening to every detail she asked only a few simple questions about whether my parents had ever lived at the cabin, paid rent, received mail there, or signed any document granting them permission to occupy the property. When I explained that none of those things had ever happened, she firmly advised me to put my refusal in writing immediately, avoid allowing any belongings inside the cabin even for a short time, and document every conversation because clear evidence often prevented unnecessary legal disputes. Following her advice, I sent the same respectful message to my mother, father, and brother explaining that I did not authorize anyone to move into my cabin, store personal belongings there, or represent themselves as residents without my written permission under any circumstances. My mother replied with a brief smiling emoji. Mason joked that I would eventually change my mind after everyone arrived, and my father remained completely silent, making it painfully obvious that they had read my warning and fully intended to ignore every word. Knowing I could no longer rely on trust, I immediately contacted a locksmith and asked him to replace every exterior lock even though the cabin had recently been completed because I remembered how my mother had secretly copied one of my apartment keys years earlier without ever asking for permission. After that, I changed every security code connected to the garage and alarm system, activated newly installed cameras covering the driveway and entrance, and tested each notification until I knew my phone would alert me the moment anyone stepped onto my property. My next phone call was to the moving company whose name I had found inside one of my mother's family messages, and after explaining the situation, I emailed proof that I was the sole legal owner of the cabin together with written instructions, refusing authorization for any furniture or personal belongings to be unloaded onto my property. The dispatcher thanked me for contacting them before the scheduled delivery because she explained that situations involving family disagreements happened more often than most people imagined, and without direct approval from. Before trying to get any sleep, I also contacted the local non-emergency police department and calmly explained that several relatives planned to arrive with a moving truck despite receiving written notice that they did not have permission to enter or occupy my property, and the dispatcher documented everything before giving me an incident reference number in case the situation escalated. Early the next morning, I placed a small table beside the front entrance with neatly organized envelopes addressed to each family member, containing copies of my written refusal, information about nearby hotels and rental homes, and a respectful letter explaining that love and family could never replace legal ownership or personal boundaries. Just before noon, my security cameras alerted me that the first vehicle had entered the driveway, and I watched from a nearby cafe as my parents, my brother, several excited relatives, and a large moving truck arrived, expecting to celebrate what they believed was the beginning of their new life inside my cabin without my approval. Their excitement disappeared almost instantly after they read the notice on the front porch, opened their envelopes, and discovered that the moving company refused to unload a single box because they had already received official instructions confirming that only I could authorize access to the property. My phone filled with missed calls and angry messages demanding that I unlock the front door immediately, but I calmly returned only after confirming that every item remained safely inside the truck and that no one had entered my home without permission. Standing in front of everyone, I explained that years of discipline, hard work, and personal sacrifice had made that cabin possible, and no amount of emotional pressure would ever change the simple truth that another person's poor financial choices could never become my lifelong responsibility. As the discussion continued, my father quietly confronted my mother and brother after learning that a large portion of the money from selling their former house had secretly been handed over to finance another one of my brother's risky business ventures, leaving them with far fewer options than he had been led to believe. The moving truck eventually drove away toward a storage facility. Several relatives apologized after realizing they had never been told the complete story, and I finally walked through the front door of my cabin knowing that protecting my peace did not make me selfish but simply proved that healthy boundaries were an important part of genuine self-respect. Months later, my relationship with parts of my family remained complicated, yet I never regretted standing up for myself, because that difficult day taught me that real love is built on honesty, respect, and personal responsibility rather than guilt, manipulation, or entitlement to someone else's hard-earned success. Please subscribe to our channel and share.